Hey, this is Rick Brandenburg for Turf Bugs and Rock and Roll in North Carolina State University, and just want to talk to you for a minute about an email I got a couple weeks ago and how I sort through some of the questions that I get to rule out what it may or may not be. And on this particular golf course, they had a lot of green June beetle grubs, and every year late in the summer they spray with Sevin or Carbaryl, and it does a real good job of cleaning up much of the problem. But they also have moles, and moles will feed on grubs, but they especially like feeding on earthworms. So they had an area around some greens, and they had a lot of mole activity. So they sprayed again with Sevin or Carbaryl, assuming it was green June beetle grubs. And after they sprayed, they saw no dead green June beetle grubs on the surface, which is a very common occurrence after you treat for this pest with Sevin. And they also saw no earthworm activity, so they wondered why they were still having mole issues. Well, in this particular situation, you assume because the Sevin hasn't worked and it has been applied, and we know that Sevin or Carbaryl always works very well against green June beetle grubs, that it's not green June beetles. And since there's no earthworm activity, you assume the moles aren't there feeding on earthworms. So they dug around a little bit and found some grubs, and obviously the situation here is that they had another species in addition to green June beetle grubs. And typically Sevin or Carbaryl is not real effective against grubs that stay down in the root zone, whereas green June beetles come to the surface, and when they eat the thatch and organic matter, Carbaryl makes for a real good stomach poison, and it does a good job killing them. So in this situation, they had two species of grubs, and typically they'd been dealing with the major species, and that had been good enough. But in certain areas, certain pockets, they had another species. The application of Sevin was not controlling that species, and the moles eventually found out about it, and they started to come in and do a lot of damage around the greens. So the bottom line is it's really not unusual to have a couple of species of grubs. And you need to keep that in mind, that if you see mole activity or you see some grub activity and you've been targeting one particular species, sometimes it's really important to go and find out exactly what you've got, because if it's two species that require different control measures or different timing of application, you need to know what you're working with so you can consolidate your practices and figure out a way that hopefully with one particular approach you can get both species. And that's what we're going to do with this course, hopefully solve the problem and allow the superintendent to move on to bigger and better things. So until next time, this is Rick Brandenburg, and we'll talk about maybe a couple of different things. We'll talk about how the warm spring weather continues, and we'll also talk about some of the products that we've had pretty good success with using as a curative or a rescue type treatment against large white grubs, particularly in the fall. So until then, we'll see you later. Bye-bye.